Why are you tied up with the sheep? Student asked. How do you mean? Like, around your neck. You called me the shepherd earlier, but aren't you the keeper of this fleet? An odd necklace for a leader of the flock to wear. I'm no shepherd. They sat for a passing moment of awkward silence. I'm a sheep. A grin spread across his face. No, you're a man. Look at your skin, your limbs, your voice that forms verbs and makes claims. You're woolless beside the hair that docks your head and face. I hate to disagree, vagrant, but you are wrong. No. Perhaps you've been tied to these stones. Just tied for too long. With that, Student wielded his axe, jumped up to his feet, and with a quick dash snapped the man free. Wide-eyed, the man looked first at his hands, then down to his feet. Apparent that his tongue had been tied, Student spoke first to the man untethered. My name is Student. Who are you? I've told you already, Student. I am you. Lies, sir. I don't know if you're lying to yourself or just to me. Be careful who you claim to be a liar, for he may be of other things too. Like what? Like a thief, perhaps? The man slid down and plucked the crown off the student's head. He was much taller than Student remembered. Give me that! Student lunged forward and began wrestling with the man, but he was like a slight wind pressing upon a cathedral. You quickly pushed Student to the ground and jumped on top of him, grabbing his neck between one hand and finding the freshly cut rope with the other. He grabbed the rope and wrapped it around Student's neck, choking him with the rope in his hand. Student grabbed his axe and with what little strength he had left marauded it into the shoulder of Yu. It struck with a hollow thud and stuck into the muscle, but Yu was unfazed. Finishing tying the rope, he stood up and dragged Student to his feet with the rope. Dislodging the axe, he smiled and handed it back to the student. This isn't your fight to take, he said. Removing the weapon, the skin returned to normal, leaving no trace or scar from desperate infliction. Yu meandered over to the sheep from first to last. He theatrically tapped each one's gem. At his touch, the sound of stones scraping filled the air as mouths, limbs, and ears started shifting. The stone sheep now sang, if you could call it that. A cacophony of hollow and pinched tones, nothing like the stones from the first garden. As they came alive, they slowly squeezed the life out of Student, dragging him with them in their aimless march. The rope tightened on his neck as he resisted, and though he tried severing the rope, the axe was no use in cutting it this time. The blade was sharp, but in his panic he wielded it differently than before. Desperate, he tried untying it, but the line was too taut. You can't get loose, Student, Yu scoffed, twirling the crown in his hand. Have you been to headwaters? Down to the river to pray? Let's make a trip. Hopefully we can arrive before you suffocate. He grabbed the rope's end by the 12th sheep, and the flock followed upstream. Student began stumbling behind the army of sheep along this bank, and what he had thought was a split rock was actually two vertical pools, perfectly circular, water flowing from their base. One was calm, flat as glass. The one opposite was in the middle of a storm, waves white-capping and hissing with angry spittle. Between the rivers sat a tree, an aspen with deep blue veins and eyes. Its leaves were golden and glinting in the wind. Yu took the crown and put it on his head. He touched one of the sheep on its gem, and its eyes went dim. He jumped up and sat. Get to work, he said, clearing his throat. What? Student choked out. Start chopping. You do it. I can't. I've tried, but I can't get near the tree anymore. Now cut it down. Student threw the axe in rebellion to the command. Yu got up, retrieved the axe, and before returning it to the teenager, grabbed the rope and reined him to submission. I said cut the tree. Student gasped and clawed at the rope. Yu gave him slack, and Student began felling. The more he chopped, the closer the sheep drew, and the looser the rope became. Nearing the end, the sheep were so near him he would occasionally hit one on the backswing. Before the final few chops, You stood up and walked over and took the axe and cut the rope between the first and second sheep, leaving student bound to a single stony beast. He led him to the other side of the tree and touched the sheep's gem. "Thanks, student," you mocked, taking the axe and crown and tossing them on the ground beside him. "You can stay here." He walked over to the sheep and yelled, and they charged the tree, ramming it and toppling it over in a single impact. It cracked more shrill than thunder and began falling toward student. In the same clap, whatever hands held the waters dammed loose, and a deluge ensued. The two rivers were now a furious one, racing a falling tree to the boy tied to the sheep. Student grabbed his belongings and tucked them to his chest. Seconds before the tree was going to crush him, the river swept him and the aspen away from each other. The tree was carried down, careened into you, tangled in with the sheep, and the water dragged them all away. The sheep student was tied to was being moved by the current, closer and closer to the stump, pulling student along with it. Student was pressed into the stump. Taking his axe, he drove it into the trunk, held on, and prayed. The longer he clung, the more violent the current, the tighter the rope became around his neck. He could let go, be choked, or drown. In any regard, he figured it would be more honorable to go out with a crown on his head. He took the diadem from under his arm, and with the last of his strength, placed it on his head to gain a better grip on the axe. Immediately, the rope dissolved, but the deluge didn't dissipate. With a fury unlike before, water careened out of the headwaters, and student was consumed. And then calm. The waters subsided, and the teenager found himself not far away from the stump, disarmed and usurped. He looked for the things bestowed by the giant, but he couldn't find them. The path he had taken to get to the field was flooded. The only way out was between the headwaters. They had returned to normal, one calm and one chaotic. He ascended the hill that laid behind them, another set of granite stairs. As student dragged himself up the final slope, his muscles burning with fatigue and his mind clouded with doubt, he wondered if he had anything left to give. Every step felt like an eternity, his breath ragged gasps in the chill of a looming dusk. But as he crested the hill, he saw it. A solitary bench, bathed in the soft glow of the evening sun. The wind pressed and beckoned him to sit for a while. With the last of his strength, he stumbled toward the seat, collapsing into its iron embrace. It was the bench close to his house that overlooked the city. He closed his eyes a little too long, and when he opened them, the sun had almost set behind. Pulling out his phone, student looked at his reflection by the pale light of a dimming dusk and noticed his eyes looked familiar. He looked back to where he had come from, but could see no pink path, nor rivers or obelisks or sheep. No crown or axe or stones that sing. The thorns and brush that barricaded the path home no longer existed either. So he stood and took to his familiar way, still feeling the magnetism and weight of a crown.